The widow's hands trembled as she gripped the plough, her bonnet slipping back against the late afternoon sun, her breath already ragged, though the day's labour had barely begun, and around her stretched acres upon acres of dry, stubborn earth that seemed to mock her strength, whispering that no woman alone could ever turn it green again. Yet she refused to yield because the farm was all she had left of her late husband, and every furrow in the soil was a promise she had sworn to keep for the children, who still looked to her as if she could perform miracles. But deep inside she knew the truth, that the field was too vast, too heavy, and the plough bit too deep for her worn hands, still raw from weeks of work, to guide through the hard ground. Sweat trickled down her neck. Her knees threatened to buckle, and just when despair pressed hardest on her shoulders, she heard the sound of boots crunching on the dry grass. Steady and purposeful, and lifting her eyes, she saw a cowboy approaching, tall against the blaze of the horizon, dust clinging to his vest and hat, his gaze steady but kind, and without a word he walked to her side, his rough hands closing over the wooden handles she struggled with. And in that moment she felt the burden lift, not because the work was done, but because someone had chosen to share it. And the cowboy's voice, low and firm, broke the silence. "We'll do this together." She wanted to argue, to say it wasn't his fight, to tell him she had to prove herself strong enough. But the truth burned inside her. She had been strong for too long, too alone, and as he pushed the plough forward with practiced ease, his muscles straining against the sun, she fell into step beside him, her smaller hands steadying the handles as they cut the earth open in long, straight lines, the furrows dark and promising where only dust had been. And with each step she felt her spirit rise, not because the work was suddenly easy, but because hope had returned, hope in the shape of a man who believed in her enough to share her burden. The air filled with the sound of the plough creaking, the soil breaking, and two hearts working in rhythm. And though the field was still large and the road ahead long, together they made progress where she alone had nearly fallen. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fire and gold, she looked at him through tired eyes that now held the glimmer of gratitude. And she whispered softly, "I couldn't have done this alone," to which he answered with a half-smile, "No one should ever have to." In that simple truth lay the lesson of the land, that strength wasn't measured by what you carried alone, but by the courage to let another carry it with you. And as the children ran from the small farmhouse nearby, their voices carrying across the field, they saw not a weary widow and a stranger, but a family being rebuilt in the soil of shared labor. Turning point where sorrow gave way to resilience, and loneliness gave way to companionship. And she understood that even the largest fields can be conquered when hearts choose to plow together. And dear listener, if this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of hope, love, and unity, then don't let it stop here. Join our growing family by subscribing to this channel, because together we can plow through more stories, more lessons, and more reminders that none of us are meant to face the fields of life alone. The next morning dawned soft and golden, the dew clinging to every blade of grass like tiny gems, and the widow awoke with an ache in her muscles, yet a new warmth in her heart, for she no longer felt the crushing weight of facing the field alone. And when she stepped outside, the sight before her stilled her breath. The cowboy was already there, at low against the rising sun, hands steady on the plough, cutting deep lines into the soil with the patience of a man who understood that real growth takes time. And as she watched him, a strange mix of gratitude and fear washed over her. Gratitude because he had chosen to stay when so many had walked away, and fear because her heart, so long shielded by loss, now stirred with something she had buried, hope. She walked toward him, her bonnet tied firm against the wind, and without hesitation she took her place beside him once more, her hands brushing against his as they worked in unison. And though no words were spoken, a bond deeper than speech formed in the rhythm of their labor. Each furrow they cut into the earth a silent vow that they would see this through together. By midday, sweat drenched them both. But when they paused to drink from the same tin cup of cool water, the widow looked across the field and saw how much had already been transformed. The stubborn soil now lay open, ready for seed, ready for life. And in her chest swelled a pride she hadn't felt since her husband was alive. A pride not only in the land but in herself, for she realized that working beside the cowboy hadn't weakened her spirit but strengthened it. The children skipped toward them, carrying a small basket of bread, their laughter echoing across the land. And when the cowboy crouched to take a piece, his eyes lifted to hers with a softness that said more than words ever could, that he wasn't just here for the work, but for her, for them, for the dream of something lasting. As the sun arched high above, the widow felt her soul begin to heal, and though the field was far from finished, she knew with certainty that this was not just the story of a farm's survival, but the beginning of a love sown in the very soil they now plowed together.